friends, welcome back to the Film Alchemist podcast, the show where we look at movies we love, break them apart, to find out what gives them their magic. I'm your host, Josh Griffey, joined as always by my sweaty, candy-loving, balloon-buying, signing his name in red,
Alex Dandino.
I was going to finish it, but we all know what he was. We don't have to put exact tags on it. All right, guys, this month, as you know, the pod is a madman. So the first theme of the month we're working on, movies that place us, the audience, in the POV of an actual madman. Today we will be discussing one of my absolute favorite films of all time, 1931, Fritz Lang, Peter Lorre, M. Just the letter, M. As always, guys, if you love the pod, and we hope you do if you're here, man, please take a second and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcast app. That helps us out enormously, guys. I really cannot stress that enough. Every time we see one, we appreciate it so much. Thank you, guys. Find us on all your social medias, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, at Film Alchemist #1. Wherever you are, we're there too, man, and we would love to talk to you. Maybe you have ideas for movies you'd like us to cover, things that are video on demand as we're not going to the theaters. We got time. And you got a voice. Let's make it happen, man. And find us on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel, Nerd Alchemist, that's plural with an S at the end, for our faces and even more fun new content. All right, all the business aside, Alex, had you watched M before today?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I had watched it in college. It was one of those German expressionist films you're supposed to watch.
Yeah.
Along with like Metropolis and Caligari and all that.
See, this is when he started normalizing, right? But it's funny. I watched Caligari the other day too on Criterion Channel because I think it's leaving. But I was like, the progression between like that and Metropolis end to M is really something to behold for old Fritz Lang.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those great German expressionisms. One of those like catch-all things that everyone, like anyone who went to film school always like, oh yes, it is such a German expression. Like, listen, I don't know what any of that shit means. I mean, like, to be honest with you, you could say something in German expression like, oh, it's dark and scary. Got it. Copy that. German expressionism.
Right.
But I think M is very interesting because it is truly like the most, I mean, it's odd. It's actually pretty procedural. And honestly, I was watching it and was thinking, man, this totally could have fit into last month's theme, The Pod's on the Case.
Yeah.
You totally could have done that.
It's funny, the further you get away from it, you forget how insanely procedural this movie is, right?
Yeah,
an
it's like a
enormous
Law and Order
amount of
episode.
this movie is, here is an unknown menace, right, that they set up in a splendid way. Repulsive, but splendid how they do it artistically, I should say. And
yeah,
we sit there, and this movie is really fascinating to me from the POV of a madman point, right? So earlier this week, Tuesday, we talked about Peeping Tom. Mm-hmm. Please go back and listen and download and watch. Peeping Tom is one of those, here is a madman, and we're split between his two worlds, right? Which is him trying to present as a normal person, and then him losing control and entering his, dark theater of the mind and, recording his deeds.
Right.
This movie is much stranger than that to me, in that in this movie, Peter Lorre is the sweatiest of madmen that we'll cover, right? Like the facade that protects Peter Lorre from the rest of us is so insanely paper thin, right? Yeah. And the more he's on screen, you start wondering, really, no neighbor, they receive thousands of tips at the police station, they say, and no neighbor's like, I don't like the cut of that Lorre guy's jib. Gross, right? Like the fact he wasn't turned in day one, that like 10 of his neighbors weren't like, ooh, that one, yikes, gross, right? But this is so this movie
you seen that
plays
short fellow with the bug eyes walking around? He didn't seem right,
right? And he's great for this role because the things that make Peter Lorre one of the most memorable and astounding actors of that era are absolutely perfect for what this movie is, right?
Yeah,
but it operates in a different manner than we cannot spend. That's what I was fascinated by this time, right? I remember this much more as Peter Lorre hunting, right? And then when you watch it again, I'm always refocused on, if this movie's an hour and 40-some minutes, let's say, it feels like maybe 25 of them are Peter Lorre. And the rest of them are, here is a city, right, that has understood that there is a a wolf amongst our flock, right? That we are
Right.
all so very far away from the handshake agreement of civility falling apart. And so you watch this weird story of how quickly one man's sickness becomes an entire city's sickness.
Right. I mean, I think that's like the really fascinating thing about M2. If you think about it in the context, and again, I'm not a historian, but if you think about the context of its time frame, it's 1931 is when it came out. So that means it probably was made in 1930, 1929. We're post World War I. We're on the way to World War II. And Germany is a very frightening place to be, no matter what. Like in that pocket of time, like historically, Germany is not a great spot to be in. So you're either poor or you are slowly becoming a fascist. But that's like really kind of the fascinating thing to me. Is
the worst period for LinkedIn of all time.
Fascist. Yeah. Like it's such a fascinating thing though about the way that this works with the city itself, because this really functions a lot on like mass hysteria. And it's interesting because I was watching this movie now, given we're in week 3 of what I would say is like week 3 of our quarantine. Like we're pretty much locked in our houses. Right. And this is like we're all starting to go a little mad. Like my wife and I are starting to like snip at each other a little bit more than we usually did. Like last week we were like, oh God,
yes.
Right. But like think about it, and we were just talking about it before the show. Like we're at that point, we're at a pivotal, like we're at a turning point right now of like, are people really going to take this seriously? Like to get rid of this, but this is really like the infection of a city's paranoia as it slowly converges on even the parts that are generally untouched, which as we find out is like the criminal underworld, which is probably the most interesting beat of this whole movie.
Absolutely.
Is that the criminal underworld obviously is like the more like there's the procedural of like the cops trying to figure out what's going on, like Lohman,
Tubby Lohman,
like Carl Lohman's trying to figure out what's going on. The inspector, like there's a lot of fingerprint, handwriting. Again, that is like the Law and Order stuff.
It's fucking scary as shit though, because it really was just like,
it's terrifying.
All you had to do was just not be seen murdering.
Yeah,
because they even mention it a couple times. They kind of slide it in like it's been 8 months. You're like, holy fuck, because the movie feels really condensed at times.
Oh yeah,
but you see these police officers and they do a great job with the detectives. By the end, they have that amazing, hilarious shot of Tubby Lohman where they make the weirdest. He just has to answer a phone call, right? But they're like, let's put the camera right under his desk and just shoot up that fupa, right? So he's like this sweaty, like underwear, fucking tank top fupa shot of our main detective. And then when he gets, hey, we caught this guy trying to break into a building, they cut back up to normal. And I was like, who decided we just needed to set the camera down and shoot up at his ginger taint? I'm just assuming he was a ginge. He just had that look, right? But then I was like, oh, fuck, what they're showing us, they're taking the piss out of this great stalwart detective, right? That he's just this guy struggling to keep up with this.
Right.
And this is the thing. Peter Lorre's character in this movie becomes this really force of nature kind of participant in the story, which is so strange. Because when we see him, the movie changes dramatically, right? Because he is so small and non-threatening, it feels like, right? Like there's a threatening, menacing look about him. Like he's definitely the kind of guy you would pull your kid a little closer. Or be like, well, if he, tries to grab my wife, I'm going to punch him. Like that kind of a look, right? You're like,
it's the bug eyes,
right? But it's not the guy that you look at and you'd be like, oh fuck, like this is, the big bad wolf. And so the movie spends a lot of time showing you guys in irrational states of fear, right? Like one of the coolest thing the movie does, right? There's a couple moments here right after the first murder, and one of the scenes I love is there's just this kindly old man.
Oh, yeah, trying to give the girl directions.
Yes, absolutely, right? And all of a sudden, you get this big bruiser who's just like, what the fuck, man? You like little girls? And he's just like, let go of me. What's your fucking problem? Like, that's all it is,
Well, it's not just him, but then, like, the whole town square
exactly
shows up.
Right.
Like,
and then everyone starts screaming for his blood. Because in this moment, there is oh, fuck, that's him. We got to fucking get his ass now, right? Then we cut to, because they do this 2 or 3 times, and it's really effective at setting a stage, right? The next one is a guy who's being arrested for burglary. And his defense is, why are you fucking harassing me? You should be arresting the murderer. And in the crowd below, they're like, wait, murderer? Murderer? That's him! Beat his fucking ass! And they grab him and pull him into this throng of people as the cops are trying to now save him.
Right.
And you just see, you're like, oh my God. And it really, this is the kind of fun juxtaposition of these couple scenes, though, because that sets the stage of people are massively afraid. And all we want to know is that the only good, innocent thing in our world is not going to be scooped up and eaten immediately, right? Our kids. Right. We want to assume our kids are safe. Later in the movie, though, there's a bit before Peter Lorre gets trapped in the building, right? Where I was like, man, you guys, like, you put a tag on his shoulder. You really followed him a long time. Like, you gave him a lot of leeway with that young girl.
Right.
And that scene struck me as unusual this time. I was like, wow, everyone's so gung-ho to get this motherfucker. But then these guys in the criminal underworld, they're kind of going a little more procedural with it themselves, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's the most interesting thing about, like so the cops are, like, analyzing handwriting. Yeah. There's that whole scene where they're, like, drawing the map, or, like, they're drawing the map, like, the sugar is around.
It's insane. Like, they're having to look at candy shop. Like, the amount of
like, they're trying to, like,
tools they did really not have.
Digging deep. Ugh. The underworld, the bosses all get together, like, listen, let's just get all the homeless around, give them a job for, like, 5 minutes. Like, so
when
that's,
they're a
like,
part
the
of you
whole
that's
bit.
like, oh my God, why don't we do that?
But it's interesting to bring up, like, the follow, because, like, I agree, it goes on really long, but I was thinking about this, and that was, like,
but
something
why
that
not just
really
snatch him, right? Like, why are the criminals not feverishly snatching up anyone?
And I really think it's something that we touched on already earlier in the show, which was, think about the first time you see anything involving Peter Lorre's character. The first time you see Hans Beckert, he's a silhouette, he's a shadow on the, like, wanted poster essentially for him. And not only that, it's towering over this little girl. So we see this poster. That's the first thing. And we see this silhouette, and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah,
like,
a poster that says, who is the murderer?
Right, exactly. Like, this is, like, that's the first stage. That's the first thing you see of the man. You're like, oh my God, like, that's a little creepy. And, like, to be fair, like, Peter Lorre has a very plaintive, like, small voice, but so does every other male character in this movie. Like, no one has a booming, like, manly voice in this movie.
Except for Tubby.
Like, everyone.
And even that.
Except for Tubby. Even that's a
Him
little.
and the safecracker guy are both going for it. They're the alphas.
Yeah. Right. But then the minute you see him, that is the thing that I thought that struck me, because I was thinking, like, why don't they just fucking take this guy down now? Like, they slap the M on him. Like, who gives a shit? What I realized, and what I was thinking of, is, like, they're trying to do what the cops won't do, which is prove to themselves beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is the guy. And, like, the reason they follow him is because he's so little and he's so plaintive, he's so quiet. There should be no reason that this would be the person, but it's in the most unlikely of packages you find the craziest monster, you know? And that's something we see all the time in movies now. And this is exactly the movie that this takes it from.
Yeah, well, I mean, it could also be these are guys who are constantly on the other end of that. Right? Like, now that we've made them into a police force, they're like, fuck, I've been fingered before. I don't like that feeling. You can see by the end they're a little more lenient on the arrest than they are on the punishment. They like the punishing. They don't like the arresting. They like the punishing. Like, once they think they got you, down off with his head, right? But it just struck me as so... And that was what I think is fun, too, is watching the kind of structures of this society bend and sway. Again, like you said, underneath this one tiny, sweaty man. But the opening of this movie, to me, I said it last week, that Peeping Tom is one of my all-time favorite movie openings. This absolutely is in that same class of, top 5 to 10 best openings of a movie to me.
Sure, totally.
Because you start off with them essentially singing Ring Around the Rosie, but it's, hey, some guy in a dark outfit's going to murder you. You're like, well, that's coming out swinging. Like, thanks, Susie. Then she trots her little, or Elsie, I think her name is. I think that's the girl who ends up getting killed. Yeah. And she trots the fuck off like, ha, 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 I'm such a scamp. Just singing about a girl. We know there's already been a murder, and they're just like, ha, let's turn that into a game. Great. Like, Jesus Christ.
Thanks, German expressionism.
Take it down a notch, Germans. Hey, Zeus. Right? And so, but then, like you said, when they get to, so there's just this kid walking around the street, right? And this mom doing her chores, and there's a cuckoo clock and whatever. And the way they subtly shift everything, right? Because this is just, here's a place. This is their way of life. The cuckoo clock chimes and the mom's like, oh, I better start making food. The little girl's like, oh, it's time to go. And as you watch their paths never meet, it struck me, and again, I had not watched this movie since I've been a dad, right? I have a 5 and a 2-year-old.
Right.
You have a 1-year-old.
I do.
This opening scene induced more dread in me than entire movies I've watched in the last decade, because now that I have a kid, and this is the fucking crazy, you'll understand this too, like, everyone makes fun of parents nowadays that we're too involved and we're helicopter parents. This fucking movie's why. Like, this is the nightmare fuel that we're all like,
well, it happens. Can't. I mean, it happens at the end of the movie. Literally, the mother is just like sobbing and uncontrollably. She goes, "We should have been watching our children more closely." And then it fades to black, and it says, "So should you." It was
Peter Lorre's like, "I did my part. I was watching close as hell."
Shame on you. Shame on you, parents.
But just this woman trotting around her house, right?
Yeah.
Just, you think she's almost here? She's almost here. She'll be here. And we fucking know for a fact what's happened. And that's such a small scene that younger, like film school Josh Grivey's like, yeah, I get it. She has a mom. Big deal. Right? But now as an adult, that to me is this moment of the movie that just absolutely rips your guts out. Because it's amazing. It's the one time we mentioned that there'd been a girl dead before and that there were 8 victims. And we see other victims of, this kind of mass hysteria, right? And rash actions.
Right.
This is the moment that just utterly humanizes the tragedy and rips your guts out. And again, for the time period, too, I'm assuming a gnarly, hey, let's go look at a dead kid's body would have been highly taboo. And the way that they play this out is fucking unbelievable. The little balloon getting caught in the power lines and it looks like where you'd get choked. That scene actually choked me up this time. And then they pair it with the ball that she was literally bouncing off the Who's the Murderer poster, just rolling to a stop with no sound, no joy, no playing.
Right.
Oh my! I mean, it's fucking terrifying.
It's so well cut together.
Yes.
Like, and for the time period too, you don't expect things to be that, like the like intelligence of cutting those things together, and like the way it's so sparsely done, and like no music. Oh my god! Like the
I don't know about which one you watched. Right, I watched a Criterion HD version that you can rent on Amazon. Mm-hmm. Surprisingly, it's not on Criterion Channel, or I don't own it. I was surprised by that. But there are long portions of this movie where they just drop all sound out.
Yeah,
and it's crazy. You don't realize it's not even like old silent films where like some of them even now have added like new scores and whatnot. Like there's just pure silence in this movie a lot.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah,
and it's really, really effective. Like to a no pun intended, deafening degree. It honestly makes things terrifying.
Well, it's because again, it reminds me a little bit of like there's a shark and I can see it from the boat, and someone plunges me underwater, and you're like the silence of that moment. Anything could be down here. This is the emotional intelligence of the editing at this time, right? And I've been struck now that we're locked up. I've been doing a lot more of that. You know what? I'm gonna go back and watch a lot of these movies that like I watched in film school but was kind of snobby about, or things that people always say like these are the classics that you just kind of skip because you're like, I get it. Like to this day, I've still only seen portions of Gone with the Wind. So like, I get it. I feel like I can do better than that. Like I know everyone loves it.
It's 4 hours long.
Yeah, I'm just like, come on, dude. I don't have time for this. Someday I'll get to it. It's like that, and like there are like 5 of those like 5-hour long like movies from that era that I'm like someday I'll watch them. I swear, But it's not happening. So and like I said, I did Calgary and some of these, and the emotional intelligence that some of these early film editors displayed, right? Because again, this is so close to the start, and this. To me, I was trying to research. I don't know that there was ever a portrayal of a serial killer, let alone a pedophile, before this, right? Like Calgary has the somnambulist Cesar, but he is under the influence and kind of running around. There are madman and murderers and Frankenstein's monster, but this is a full-on serial killer pedophile, right?
Yeah.
And so to tackle something so wildly taboo, and find ways. This is one of those great examples of what films can do, right? It shows us an image of broken innocence, right? Of a banal scene of our day-to-day life, and then is like, oh, it's not the way you see it, though, and now your heart is ripped out. Because later when they're like, you know what state we found the body in? In our hearts and our minds, we do. Without ever seeing anything.
Right. I mean, yeah, I think that's the scare. It's the best part about this movie in general is that, quite frankly, everything that is left off screen is so brilliantly terrifying.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to see anything. And that's like what I think makes, because if you had seen, like, think about it this way, if you'd seen the level of violence, say, that you would have seen in, like, Silence of the Lambs, and then you would have watched the Peter Lorre's big scene where he gets to do the big confession bit, the piss would have been so far taken out of that. You've been like, this is so hammy. Why is this happening right now? But because you've never seen a body, you've never seen anything, all you've ever seen is balloons and, like, honestly, like, little girls. When he breaks down and goes out like that, it is unsettling beyond comprehension.
We see a balloon in power lines. We see a ball bouncing and coming to a full dead stop, right? Mm-hmm. And the very first time we see Peter Lorre is not long after that, right? He's written a letter to the newspaper or whatever. And he's sitting there doing this fucking thing where he's, like, playing with his face. Where he's, like, looking at himself almost happy, but then also, like, what is this thing? He does not recognize his own human face. And that's our opening to him, as they're describing the, like, psychosis of, you know, being a madman who would write this letter. And then there's just this little tiny, schlubby, sweaty, non-threatening guy looking at his own face like, I don't know what I'm seeing either. And it sets you on such... Because this is the thing. Imagine, though, that final scene, that courtroom scene of Peter Lorre. You can say that there's other actors that have had better, like, monologue moments than that. And I would argue, like, you can do as good, but you can't do better, right? It's one of those arguments I make. Like, there are some movies you're like, you can make a movie as good as that, sure. Can't make one much better, right? And this from Peter Lorre, this is the career-defining moment of everything that made him so special as an actor. And so you match the kind of smaller moments we've seen with him, and especially in that final trial. Right. The depths of terror that he instills in you completely fill the bucket of your mind on what we didn't see.
Exactly.
In so many movies today, they're like, oh, we'll get that extra, from the audience by showing, like, an arm snap or a throat slice or whatever. And there is, like, even you said Silence of the Lambs, right? To this day, I still watch that movie, and, like, when he's, like, swinging the baton, but it's like, well, that's a guy who never played baseball, right? Like, you're just like, I don't know. Like, did he really beat those guys' asses? Like, could Anthony Hopkins really have beaten the... And it took me out of the movie. You're like, that's so weird and corny. It reminds you almost in that scene of, like, oh, this is what someone was, like, recanting to, like, a newspaper. Like, this is the spooky bad guy version of this, right?
Right.
Because it's just, it's almost a little too goofy for me. And this movie... I mean, obviously a lot of people will say Jaws, but, I think this movie might be the best and purest example of they show us exactly what we need and not a thing more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's the benefit of, like, it's the benefit of the movie being of the time is that in this case, like, it's all, like, think about it. Like, I feel like if this movie was made now, like, I think they remade it in, like, a miniseries or something like that. But either way, like, imagine someone trying to make a movie.
Him?
I think so. Yeah, like a German miniseries. But, like, imagine.
That, like, blew my socks off. I can't fathom that as a thing that is real. Holy shit.
I mean, there's a bunch of murder shows on. Why not? But that to me is, like, the best part about the fact that this movie was made in the 30s is that, first off, this is Fritz Lang's first talking picture. Like, everything he'd done up to that point was silent. So, like, he was almost limited by the fact that he was experimenting with something completely new. And it has such an effect to the right degree that it is, like, nearly perfectly cut.
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
I would say, like, it's so well edited and so well produced that it's almost, I say, like a perfect movie in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people who watch this movie will say, I could have used a lot less of everyone who wasn't Peter Lorre, right? And the detective. And
I guess.
I actually, finishing it this time, I was so much more struck by the importance of, well, it's like even the old guys who were in the smoking lounge, right? Like them just sitting there shooting the shit, and then the one guy being like, hey, you might have fucked a chick. And he's like, what? We just played golf. Like, oh, fucking. And these two guys are just like, no, you fuck chicks and kill. No, you fuck. Like two old friends, right? And they're just sitting there like, yeah, I'll throw you all the way under the fucking bus. And those scenes become extra scary because, and again, I think we are in a profound moment where we're able to see how thin these layers of society can be. And just that sneaking, right? Like a movie that does this really well, like a modern example is something like The Hunt, where you see the power in fear of something bad could have happened and we must accuse someone so fast, right? To get this over with, right? Because then even if it's the wrong guy, like they're more worried about just having a guy. And that's what this movie turns everyone into. And it's so weird to, because like they turn the police into this force that's like, oh, now we're going to enforce more laws to hopefully catch a bad guy. And bad guys are like, we'll fucking... Meanwhile, they're just smoking, 5,000 cigarettes smoked in this movie. Because everyone's just stressed the fuck out. You're like, that's a big mood. I understand that exact headspace.
However, my favorite big dick cigar moment is that guy with the pipe. The weird one.
He puts a cigar in his pipe.
Puts a cigar in it, and then he's smoking, and then so he can see who he's talking to, he switches the sides of his mouth.
His eyes are just literally like desert dry. And he's like, good God. It did take me back to college when I worked in a bar, the Chug in Muncie, where you could smoke. And I was like, after my first shift as a bouncer, like I couldn't see for like 2 days, I felt. And watching this movie, there is like an extra layer. You're like, what Peter Lorre's doing is bad. But you guys sitting in that room, like, that's also psychopathic behavior. Like, get out. Like, you can't be in a room with 20 guys chain smoking like that. It's not okay. It's so...
Yeah, no, it's terrible.
But the guy smoking a cigar in the pipe and everyone having, like, cigar holders, I'm like, that's just class, dude. I like that.
Yeah, the guy who's smoking his cigar in the pipe and then literally has to change sides of his mouth so he can see who he's talking to, that is a level of awesomeness I'm not sure anyone will ever achieve again.
Oh, for sure, man. I love that shit, though.
But that's like probably, it's a weird thing. Like, it's one of my favorite sight gags in the movie. I'm like, I don't know if that's on purpose or if that's like, because I've never smoked cigars from a pipe.
I smoke.
So I don't know if that's like, I don't know if that's like a customary thing. If you stick your cigar in a pipe, you have to like switch sides for it.
Yeah, you move it around and chew on the side so you look like an old salted dog. Yeah. No, I mean, it's just classy. It's just functional.
But it is interesting.
So walk me through this, right? Let's use this as an example, right?
Sure.
I would imagine some modern audience is saying it just takes too long to get to the point, right? And that they want more of the serial killer madman. And there are a lot of people who are probably like, why the fuck is this on your list of putting us in the POV of a madman when so very much of it's not from his perspective? And this is where I would push back, right? This is something that struck me today. I think all the scenes where Peter Lorre's not involved, I think we're watching through his eyes. They always talk about how he borrows his neighbor's paper. He's writing to the paper, desperate for attention. I think Peter Lorre is getting his mad rocks off seeing the amount of fear he inspires in this town.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say that the point of view of the killer is that the point of view of Peter Lorre in this movie is the fact that everyone is just like suspicious.
Yeah.
Everyone's suspicious of everyone. Like you're totally right though. Like the less Peter Lorre, the better in this movie. And I think people who would say they wanted more are not understanding the point of this movie at all. Like this movie is about the effect something like this can have, like the earth-shattering consequences it might have on a community, like a small enough community too. Like I'm not saying that this is fucking Berlin. I'm not saying it's like, it's not my fucking cul-de-sac in Aurora, Ohio. I'm saying that like,
yeah, it'd probably be a little easier to be like, yeah, that guy who looks like Peter Lorre. Let's start with him.
Yeah, like if this was Ohio, I'd literally just point at the guy and be like, it's definitely that guy.
He just sweats all the time. He's always whistling this song, and we hate it. We all hate it. But yeah, I think that
Yeah,
it reminded me a bit of Zodiac in this viewing, right? Because we watched them both
very
recently.
much so.
But there is this omnipresent power when the killer's not on screen and watching people just try to live their lives in the world where they're coming across true evil. Right? And I think most of us, that's why that trial scene works so well too, is because they actually ask us the important question, which is, does anyone have the right to do what he's doing? Because, I have a kid, and if you told me today, it's like, hey man, anyone who is 100% guilty of murdering or doing things like this to a child, would you be okay if we just took them out back and old Yellered them? And I'd be like, yeah. I absolutely
probably.
think, like, if you're a child, like, if you've done horrible, unforgivable things to a child, right? And that's me. I do think there are unforgivable acts. Because to me, it's like, I totally understand murdering, like, your neighbor, right? Or your wife. Like, I understand adults killing each other. If you can do that to a kid, like, yeah, I'm okay with you. But then you're put in the spot. You're like, oh, okay, so I'm down for killings, right? But I don't like when it gets messy and spills over into the air. And that's what I think the power of these kind of movies begin. And that's why I think we are watching in a bit of a cathartic way through the eyes of Peter Lorre in this movie while he's not on screen. We are watching the effects that this man, who probably feels small, ostracized, weak, powerless, he was institutionalized, right? We are seeing him become this godlike monster that he is in his mind. And we're kind of mocking a little bit, right? Because the other thing about this movie that really struck me this time is they let us see Peter Lorre a lot earlier than I remember seeing him. And just saying the hunt for this guy is not important because we know who he is, right? So there are large chunks of police procedural where we already know exactly who it is, right? This isn't like, Zodiac and other movies where they're trying to figure it out. We fucking know. So you're watching these police go through this very serious investigation knowing exactly if they're right or wrong. And so to me, what are we supposed to be gleaning from that? It is the helplessness.
Right.
And in that way, we are looking at the police and the criminals and the townspeople the way he looks at his victims.
Right. I mean, that's exactly the way. I think that's the way you're supposed to interpret that information because it's the most deft way to convey that level of paranoia and that level of terror in the world that we're living in this movie. Like, that's the best way to do it. So, yeah, in that regard, like, there's no reason for Peter Lorre's character to not literally just be hanging over every scene, watching them, like, again, him writing letters, like, to the cops and then him writing letters to the paper. Like, he wants the notoriety. He wants someone to notice what he's doing.
Right.
So clearly there is that level. So to me, it's a perfect summation of, like, between paranoia and also just the general feeling of fear he's meant to instill in the community itself.
And then I think that matters a lot because I think one of the scenes people would be like, we get it faster, is when he's trapped in that office building, right?
Right.
But to me, some of my favorite moments in this movie are watching Peter Lorre be hunted, right?
Totally.
The turnaround of him realizing the absolute terror. As this segment of the movie is great. This is when he goes out and he's just looking around. Toys, right? Innocent window shopper guy.
Right.
He sees this girl in the mirror and seemingly just gets all torqued up. He's like getting all raged up. And then all of a sudden he's like, do, 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 do. It's almost as if his boner's the one whistling it, right? Like, that's how excited he is. And we see him stalking this child. You're just going, no. We are fucking horrified in that moment. In that moment. Because you're like, oh my God, another one. Another balloon's about to go sailing. You're so fucking scared. And the mom snatches her daughter up. And it is one of the biggest sighs of relief I felt in a movie in a long time here. It's like, oh my God. But again, it's reinforcing this kind of subtle, there is just evil all around us all the time. And how do we know? The evil could even be in us, as the movie's showing us a lot. So then when you
Right.
see him in this hunter's mode, to then turn around in the fucking moment. And there's even the weird one where the girl hands him back his knife right after the guy handprints him.
Mm-hmm.
The moment he sees that M in the mirror, right? Because there's a lot of this they do too, which is showing Peter Lorre always reflected. Not a lot of like direct face-on shots. Obscured, shadowed reflection, right? Because he's not a real person. Or that version of him, right? The fear in his face. And you're like, oh my God, we've turned this whole movie from omniscient, evil harbinger of child death to look at this little tiny fucking coward just running.
Right.
And I think I found that fascinating.
I mean, yeah. I mean, that's exactly what it is. Like
Your thoughts on use the office building as like a bigger, like, what do you think's important about that part of the movie? Right? And why does that need to be in a movie like this? Could you take that out and they could have just caught him and go straight to the trial?
No. Like the whole point of it builds the tension. It's interesting. Like it almost like inversely builds the tension a different direction. Because like the whole movie, we've been waiting to see this guy.
Yeah.
And now we've seen him, and yeah, he's like a sweaty little nobody. So now he's been fingered by the beggars, and they're like everyone's chasing him. They're taking him through. But you've got to have.
Did you feel empathy for him at all in that moment?
I mean,
when his weak little self was like cowering on the wall.
I wouldn't say that moment. It's when he gives a speech that you start to feel a little bit of empathy. But like that's the whole point of the chase itself, is it has to get you all the way to the kangaroo court when you actually have to have the empathy to listen to this guy talk.
That part's important because it shows you criminals forming together, working together. Those criminals go in and are breaking a night watchman's fingers to try to get information, right?
Right.
But you're watching them, so you're rooting for men who have also committed murder to catch a man who looks weak and frail and scared, who we are told is committed a murder. We don't ever see his crimes, again, which that's why that's important now, too. So that whole office building is just saying, here is a long period of time for you to sit and stew in gray area, right? You are rooting for criminals and murderers to catch and murder another murderer. And we're sitting here judging from on high. So then that office building works as the real kangaroo court before we ever get to the trial.
True.
I think it's a very important part of the movie.
It's an important thing because again, it gives us the time to sit there and make the decision for ourselves if we're actually going to have empathy for this guy or not.
Yeah.
It's a hugely important waiting period we have before we get to the final beat. Well, and that's a big reason the movie is effective.
And I think it's the genius of Peter Lorre is, they say it's always the eyes with the actor. Well, he had the biggest, buggiest eyes, right? And
absolutely, man.
And not in just kind of, oh, look at that weird attribute. Like he really projects true. He plays as a truly like terrified child himself. Totally. Like in that when he's cowering in that little room, right? There are moments where you see him start to get rageful. Like when he's screaming at his knife, you fucking... And you're like, oh, wow, okay, there's something going on. But when he's just cowering in the corner, he has a childlike defenselessness about him.
Yeah, because he doesn't feel...
You don't imagine him as like, here's the big bad wolf that needs to get turned into a coat. You know what I mean?
Right, but like that's what it is. Like he doesn't feel in control of this thing. Yeah. Something else is controlling him. So his reaction is this like fear of... His reaction is fear of self, but then now that this other self has like caused him such pain, he now has to fear the other people.
Oh my God.
Originally.
It's unbelievable. So then we cut to the trial, and I would argue that the trial in this movie is amongst my 10 favorite scenes in the history of all the movies, right?
Yeah.
I fucking adore this setup, right? So, I mean, I think you said it best. It is kind of a kangaroo court where it's a bunch of criminals, a lot of whom are murderers, who want to catch this guy not because of children or whatever. I think there is a part of them that likes being on that side of judging other people, right? As a lot of them have been to jail anyways. So there's a power in that. They want to get back to committing their crimes that they think are okay. And they're just
Right.
judging the shit out of this guy, right? And just the
No,
whole
no one's
concept
giving
of
him any.
they've already caught him. You already know he's the child murderer. Why do
Right.
they go through the act of having the trial?
I mean, but I think because it's almost like their form of civility. Like, think about it. Like, these are murderers.
They're trying to
these are-
set themselves above the monster.
Right. It's like, well, basically, yeah, they're trying to say,
Yeah.
well, what we're not going to do is this.
Yeah, man.
Like, that's the most bizarre thing of all is literally it's a bunch of people who, in general, are paid to be total monsters. They're saying, no. Hey, we're not idiots, all right? We're going to make sure this is done right. Like, that's like the weirdest thing about the movie is like all these people should be like basically picking like who gets the short straw to not kill the guy, you know? And
well, you're like, they should have just killed him in that office building. Like, the act of dragging him out as the police are coming to start arresting them.
right.
Like, their psychological need to pass judgment on him and pretend that they're better than him. I think that's what the movie does, right? Is that within all of us, there are these bits of evil, right? And what Peter Lorre says, too, which I love, is he's, how the fuck can you guys judge me, right? Like, you could all do better. You could just go get jobs
right. He
and
calls them
not
all
be
just
lazy
lazy
and shit.
assholes.
Yeah, he's like, you guys could all, you don't have to be a safecracker who's also killed people, right? Like, you could
Right.
just go get a job, right? We see he has good management skills, right? We've seen it in the movie. You could just go be a manager somewhere, like a shift manager. But instead, you're a
Right.
piece of shit, just like me. But then he
Right.
starts breaking down, and the line he screams that just fucking rips your heart out is when he's like, wow, God, I can't remember the exact line, but he goes, but I can't help it, I think is what he says, right? I can't help it. And he starts, and he's like, I just hear this voice, and I can't resist it, right? You guys could do other stuff. This voice takes me over. And then I wake up and have to read about the horrific things I've done and not even remember them, right? So there's a weird, he's obviously doing this to fulfill some deep, horrible need. But he's kind of telling us in a weird, like, reach for empathy. Like, I don't even really get to enjoy this because I don't have the memory in, like, my psycho bank. So I have to keep going out and refilling this urge. And again, it's the kind of thing that I'm assuming audiences at the time would, kind of laugh off or assume more with, like, a Christian evil. I think nowadays we're so much more familiar with the kind of person that he is, right? And it's so funny that this movie's so ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Because all these serial killers, dude, if you read about them, they all call it the dark passenger, the dark thing inside. They all talk about this other thing.
This is super Dexter.
Yeah.
Like,
well, they all talk about this other voice, this other compelling force that's separate from them but deep within them that makes them do these things. Right? There is this part of being a human, and I think in a weird way that's what the trial's doing too. There's this need, even as a human, to on a genetic level that what you're doing is wrong. And we all have to separate from it. This is just a much more extreme because his deeds are so bad. But watching Peter Lorre just break down, and then in the moment he fucking slips and his eyes roll back like the Undertaker, and he's like, that's sweet.
oh, that's the best.
Sweet moment. And he has like this moment where like he lets down for a minute, and you're like, for 1 second of that trial he's showing us his truest person,
Right.
and it's fucking insane. The shot of the trial, though, that's the moment I was like, this kills me, is when he sees that little balloon floating, and it's shot from the God angle. Like this little angel's looking down on judgment on him, and he knows he's fucked.
It's brutal.
But also remember this, though. The only evidence against this guy, truly, other than that he was caught with a girl and ran and hid, right, which seems like something a guilty person would do, is the word of a blind alcoholic.
True.
Because we see the blind, I'm assuming he's an alcoholic. He could have just been a German at the time. He's definitely smashing a giant party-sized beer. Right?
I mean...
Like, I'm just saying, some blind guy who is probably 5 sheets to the wind is like, I heard that song before. Go fucking kill that child murderer. And again, we know that he did it, but just as an audience, where you're like, wow, that is flimsy at best witnessing, right? Like, at best, legally in a court of law, I think that would be a pretty flimsy holdup. Granted, the cops would have him, but these people don't have all that evidence because they didn't do the work.
Right.
So it's just reinforcing this kind of their desperation to judge this man and put evil away.
Well, I mean, short of his confession, I mean, like, it's not like he, like, denied the whole thing.
Well, he confessed once he's like, I'm not going to be able to get Cochran in here to be like, hey, breathalyze the witness, the one witness. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm not saying he should have gotten away with it. I'm just saying
Well,
that's not a strong case. That's not a strong case. Even if it's 100% right.
I guess.
Defense lawyers today probably jerk off to that movie. They're like, I could have gotten him. I could have gotten him to skate.
Do you think they show this in law school? They'll be like, don't do this, whatever you do.
Yeah, well, they play it in, like, training rooms for lawyers. And the guys that are J-O-ing in the dark, they're like, you're a scumbag defense lawyer. Like a high-powered one, not helping innocent people. Like, you know the ones I'm talking about. They're good defense lawyers. But the ones who J-O to this courtroom scene, they're not good. That's not a good. That's a bad. But that's what I mean. That's a flimsy-ass one witness. Some blind guy heard someone whistling a very popular tune of the time.
But that's the important thing about this movie is that we get through the entire thing and we don't give a shit about any of the actual... We don't give a shit about any of the actual evidence. What matters is that the guy confessed to doing something so heinous, no one can even speak of it.
Yeah.
And he just takes his licks. He doesn't even try to escape. He just...
Well, no, he does. He gets to that door and he's like, nine. And they're just like punching his hands and shit. And then but that's what I mean. There's a part of him that's even like, hand me over to the cops because I think he thinks he can still skate. Because, again, they've got one drunk blind witness. He still thinks he can get away with it somehow. He's already slipped through the cracks of the system. And besides the amazing acting and the defense lawyer, I will not be shouted down. But he even says, he's like, no one has the right to take a life. Not you, not the fucking state. No one.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the important... They give you a legitimate reason to question your insatiable hunger to see this man broken and beaten and punished, right? And they top it off with that mom, dude. Just that broken shell of a woman who's like,
God,
none of this will bring my kid back. And that's the important moment, because we all have to sit there and by the end of this movie, right, we know the monster this man is. We've vicariously been terrified of him the entire movie, right?
Right.
And now we see him, right? We even had empathy for him in that building, right? Like, he seemed a little bit like a scared guy, whatever. But when he breaks down and we see his mask slide, we're like, fuck him. But then we're sitting here on the side with all these other murderers.
Right.
Judging a murderer. And the mom even says, this isn't going to fucking fix me. The one person who's been hurt and actually harmed by this crime the most. And we have to sit there as an audience and say, do we just want retribution and revenge?
Right.
Which is revenge never helps anyone, right? Or do we want true justice?
Right. I mean, this movie starts as it sort of starts as this weird cat and mouse, and it really becomes a movie about what is real justice.
Yeah.
What are you really after with this? Like, if you capture a guy and you put him on fake trial and make him confess to the crimes he's committed, are you, and then for what? For what purpose? Just so you have the satisfaction of knowing?
But and it's like, why are they going through this process of torturing this man when they clearly just want to murder him? Right? So they're being extra cruel to him in a way because they want him to fucking suffer. And I'm a person who is like, yeah, like, if you're one of those guys, like a child murderer and a pedophile, like, I wouldn't feel bad for you, man. And then you're sitting there like, why is that, right? Like, it's not going to make anyone feel better for having suffered these crimes. And it's...
Right.
And that's what I think is cool, man, is it's not just, here's a madman, and now we're going to see him strung up and beaten and dragged through the streets. The movie says, hey, we know this guy's a piece of shit. We've scared you the whole movie. And then we pulled a rope-a-dope on you, and now we're saying, hey, maybe whatever's wrong with him, there's a little seed of that in all of us. You know what I mean? That is powerful. If at the end of the movie you can make me wonder if I have moral high ground on a child murderer and pedophile. And that is how expertly paced this movie is, right? They're walking you through step by step, and then at the end they just let it go and say, I know you won't run because you got nowhere to go. We backed you into a corner. It's the unwinnable debate that I think we all suffer, man.
True.
How much of a monster do you become in an effort to destroy a monster?
Right. how far are you willing to take the monster before you become one yourself?
Yeah, and maybe we can never kill him. And I think that's the beautiful part of Peter Lorre is he is this just kind of small, vulnerable person. But in that moment, even when he's cowering on the ground and he looks so diminutive, you're like, there is this giant shadow that fills that whole fucking screen. And that's why he's a perfect casting for that, man. 'Cause you're like, even that guy can become this ultimate shadow over this entire movie and city, man. That's really scary. And that's what I'll take from this time. Just the brilliant, masterful use of sound and the things we don't see, right? Because this is the weird thing. When the blind guy actually pegs him, he is the closest to us, right? We also have not fully seen him. We also know him by his deed and his sound, mostly, right? And so that blind guy finding him, that's really cathartic, right? You're like, there's a whole city looking. And the only person who could see him was the one not distracted by his facade of normalcy, right? So I think that's what I'll take from the movie this time is it's so much more haunting than I remember, man. And I know you experience the same thing. Like, we have kids now.
Yeah.
And we just texted, and I was like, yeah, like, if we weren't quarantined, I don't think my kids would be out of my sight for like a month at least. Because you're like,
especially after watching this.
This scene is the fucking nightmare. Just looking up at a clock and being like, it's 1 hour past when my kid would be home. Right?
Oh, yeah, man.
It also made me think, I was like, God damn, imagine if they had Casey Anthony's lawyers back then. Peter Lorre would have skated. Like, imagine the fear of your child being 1 hour late and not knowing where they are.
I mean,
and then imagine it being 30 days and you're at Blockbuster getting tattoos and wet t-shirt contesting. I'm sure she's innocent. I'm kidding. The law passed her off. It's fine.
I mean, I get nervous now when I don't see my kid and I'm in the same room with him.
Oh, well,
what?
This is a great parenting moment. When you finally get peace and quiet, you go, that's not right.
Right. Yeah, Andrea and I, actually, it happened today. Andrea and I were watching him, and he was in the corner of a room, and I was like, she's like, it's really quiet. And I'm like, where's the kid? And we listened, and he's just like playing by himself, and she was like, it was way too quiet.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Fuck yeah, dude.
It's the worst. I was sitting here doing some work today. My other son's next to me playing Mario. And I look over, and I'm like, wow, I'm missing one. Where's the other one? He's like, I don't know. I think he's playing. And I ran out of my room like, fuck. Like, terrified. I went upstairs. He's just playing with toys. Just happy as shit playing by himself. But I was, like, scared in my own home, right? And that's the thing. I was like, people make fun of, man, the helicopter parents and whatever. It's because movies like this, and for us, it was like the news and other movies and TV, Lifetime Network. The entire deluge of media of our entire lives is like, everyone wants to kill you and your innocent family. But, dude, I don't know. I watched this scene, and that, I mean, it is a gut punch. And then to imagine, this movie is almost 100 years old.
Yeah.
And the emotional and artistic power that they manipulate out of these images on something that is so taboo for the time. It's pretty normal for us to see movies about things like this. But for the time and how much they were skirting around what was in front of all of us to still be able to milk that reaction out of us 100 years later. I think that's one of the brilliant things about, you know, film, especially like foreign films and really old films, is you're like the way they just emotionally are so bonded to the time whenever you're watching it. This movie will work in every era from now until the sun explodes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most important thing about this movie is that it never loses its potency. I mean, like, particularly now, I'll say, like, it's even more potent.
Oh,
just because of the situation we're in our lives.
Yeah. Walk me through this, Alex. Final, right? You've walked in the shadow of a madman. You've hunted a city. You walk around whistling. Enter the Mountain King of the Mountain. Is that it? Mountain King? Is that what it was?
I think
that's
the
the
song
song.
is called
Enter the
in
King of the
the Hall of the Mountain King.
The Hall of the Mountain King, right? All right, so you did this. We chose this on our The Pod Becomes a Madman, right? This is all about killer POV. What did the POV of Peter Lorre's killer do for you in this movie, right?
I mean, for me, it re-scared the shit out of me as a new parent. But then also, it provided me, it does that thing that I really enjoy about movies is like a character doesn't have to be in the room to affect the people in the movie that it's about. And I think that's something that I love the most about this is that I I felt fear in a way for him. I felt fear in a way that I had not felt before we had a kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's what it did.
I mean, the thing I took from it is just how you can't ever put a face on evil, right? Every face becomes evil. Again, that scene, we see this whole series of horrific things and the whole setup of the world, and the scene that I'll always take with me, right? The trial scene is spectacular. But right. Peter Lorre just staring at his own face in the mirror, right? That first moment of us getting a look at this man and all the horrible things that we've experienced up in this movie, and we get to that guy, and we're just watching some evil force inside of a meat suit. You know what I mean? Just
interesting.
Just fucking sitting there staring at itself saying, I don't get it either. That's the scariest thing. I think we all understand the plotting madman, like, I have a plan, I will carry out a plan or an attack. This is just a guy who, like, he doesn't even understand. He is just compulsively doing one of the most heinous, disgusting things that any of us could imagine. And the fact that that's just happening in the heart of a city and a society, and with all these people on guard, criminals trying to reform themselves to catch, they still can't, because it's unimaginable to us that a thing like this exists amongst us, while we know it does. So that's what I take from Peter Lorre's portrayal, is just that seed of evil, and not having any idea how big how much germinations happen in any other human being. And it's really, truly fucking terrifying performance. And again, I think the best analog for it is what you said earlier with Silence of the Lambs, which is, again, Hopkins is in that for what, like 13 minutes? Peter Lorre gets roughly about the same amount of time in this movie. And again,
maybe
it's just
less.
Yeah, it's like an oversized shadow he cast on this whole movie. Every scene you're not there, you are still seeing his face, right? And I feel like I'm watching through his eyes, you know, at this fucking mockery of society. I don't know. I think this movie's infinitely stunning. It's gotten better every time I watched it, and I think there'll never be an era where this movie should not scare you.
No, I mean, I think that's an all-timer, you know?
Yeah, and Peter Lorre, while so specific in his look and his skills, becomes one of the best basins for any of us to examine this kind of behavior, right? Like other killers, I think they have their things that make it harder to relate to them. This one, you could just imagine anyone being that guy, the killer, in a weird way.
Right. Well, I mean, we all have something horrible. We'll have something horrible buried in us.
Yeah.
But, you know, not saying everyone's a serial killer deep down, but everyone has something
but that's
dark
what the movie's saying is, you sit here and judge, you know, Mr. Ivory Gloves. It's like, yeah, I mean, I do, I think. I don't know. What? This movie made me think about everything, about like Law and Order. I'm like, why do we still have wars? Like, fuck, man. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm in the wrong headspace. I just like everything. We should just all. I want to hug again. I want the whole world to hug and be cool. But yeah, I don't know. I think this movie is utterly terrifying, and I think this is one of the greatest madmen in the history of movies. I think it's just one of the best movies ever. So, guys, that's it for M. I hope you loved it as much as we did. You can find this movie for free on a lot of apps if you search on your various devices. But Amazon's got, an HD rental. You can buy it for $20. I have a feeling, guys, this is a movie you'll come back to multiple times. Maybe you already have. Make the investment, guys. It is phenomenal. So our next good. Madman, Alex, the pod becomes a madman. Who's our next week's madman you want to cover?
Well, I chose last time. You should choose this time.
All right, so let's do Henry next.
Okay, sounds good.
So we've still got Henry, and then we'll do Henry next. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. Cool. Amazing, scary, terrifying, vulgar film that I fucking love. It's kind of the inverse. Whereas M shows you a lot of like, here are images and you have to imagine. Henry shows you a lot of aftermath, and that's what you have to imagine off of. Right. So it's really a cool inverse to M, I think. It'll be a fun movie to discuss. Even though it's vulgar, guys, but it's mad. They're mad men. That's it. So we'll be seeing you next Tuesday, every Tuesday, Thursday, working on some double features and some other stuff. You might just start seeing other movies drop, guys. If there's something you'd like to see us cover, hit us up on social media. We'll do our damnedest to get every single movie you guys request of us. Sometimes, there's more than we can get to, but hey, we always keep the list and we'll get to them eventually.
We're trying.
Yeah, please leave us a rating and review, especially on Apple Podcast app. That helps us out enormously. And follow our channel on YouTube, Nerd Alchemist. That's plural with an S at the end. So you can see our face and any other of the new content we are working on developing. For the Film Alchemist, I'm Josh Griffey.
I am Alex Dandino.
Keep your kids close.